Good evening. I'm Nima, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, January 12th. And tonight, we hear from major airlines regarding delays and cancellations that left some people stranded at their destinations. Sunwing Airlines President Len Corrado has told the Commons Transport Committee that he's sorry that the company failed to meet passengers' expectations. Hundreds of travelers ended up stranded in Mexico over the holidays. This comes after Sunwing canceled their flights, citing weather issues. The airline then canceled all flights out of Saskatchewan until early next month. The committee is investigating what caused the widespread disruptions in the days before and after Christmas. Air Canada and WestJet representatives told MPs this morning they did their best to brace for a busy holiday season, but had to deal with a winter storm that hammered airports. All right, well, meanwhile, a First Nation in Saskatchewan says ground-penetrating radar has discovered 2,000 areas of interest at the site of one of the longest-running residential schools in the country. Project lead Sheldon Poitras says his team is looking at options, including DNA testing, to confirm what is there. But he says they don't believe all are unmarked graves. The Star Blanket Cree Nation, northeast of Regina, began searching the former site of Capel Indian Residential School last year. All right, well, this comes as Canada is being accused of failing to address long-standing violations of Indigenous rights. Human Rights Watch released its annual World Report today, which includes a scathing rebuke of what it calls the federal government's inadequate climate policy, the violations of the rights of Indigenous people, and immigration detainees. One issue highlighted is the fact that more than 24 First Nations remain under long-term drinking water advisories. This despite a promise by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to reduce that number to 0. The group also says Canada's border agency continues to operate without oversight, detaining some asylum seekers indefinitely. Turning to Alberta now, where a university professor plans to assess the level of white supremacy in the Canadian military. Andy Knight has received a grant from the Department of National Defence to conduct the study over the next year. He plans to interview military members and officials, along with policymakers from diverse backgrounds. Now this, to understand what attracts these white supremacists to the armed forces. He then intends to devise strategies aimed at weeding them out. Well, at least one worker is missing after an explosion at a propane facility in a town north of Montreal. Quebec provincial police are evacuating parts of Saint-Roch-de-l'Achigan because more explosions are possible. Local officials are warning people to stay away from the area because there are more propane tanks on site. Moving to a new report which warns that the Bank of Canada could lose billions over the next few years. The C.D. Howe Institute report estimates the total losses over the next 2 to 3 years will add up to between $3.6 and $8.8 billion. Economics professor Trevor Tome, who co-wrote this report, says the size of the losses will be determined primarily by interest rates over the next few years. Last fall, the central bank posted the first loss in its 87-year history, losing $522 million in the first quarter. Ontario Provincial Police are offering a $100,000 reward in the case of a missing 37-year-old woman. Elnaz Haj Tamiri was abducted from a relative's house in Wasaga Beach, Ontario 1 year ago today. She was taken by 3 men dressed in police gear who police are still searching for. Weeks before her abduction, police say Ms. Haj Tamiri was assaulted in an underground parking lot in Richmond Hill, Ontario. Her ex-boyfriend, Mohammed Lilo, has been charged in both cases, while 2 other men have been charged in the assault case. One person has been seriously injured after explosions and a fire in St. Catharines, Ontario. The city's fire services chief says it happened at a hazardous waste facility in downtown St. Catharines just after 6:30 a.m. Eastern. This was before spreading to a nearby industrial building. An employee at the waste facility was taken to hospital with significant burns. A neighborhood near the facility has been evacuated because of a black plume of smoke blowing toward the area. All right, well, on the West Coast, Vancouver-based Canfor Pulp Products is closing a line at its Prince George Pulp and Paper Mill. The closure is throwing about 300 people out of work. It says the jobs will likely be gone by the end of the year. The company is blaming a lack of fiber for its pulp operations, but says the specialty paper facility at the mill will stay open. Halifax and Moncton were the fastest growing urban regions in Canada last year, according to Statistics Canada. New figures indicate the Moncton area grew by 5.3% between July 1st, 2021 and July 1st of last year. We'll be right back. Well, a new year often comes with new resolutions. And this is true especially when it comes to growing your finances. And the ever-expanding world of investment is ripe with opportunities. Joining us now to walk us through the various types of investments to consider in 2023 is Brendan Caldwell, Director at Caldwell Securities Ltd. Brendan, welcome back.
Thank you, Nima. Happy New Year yet again.
Happy New Year. Now, what kind of financial resolutions should investors make for 2023?
Depends on the investor. But I think in general terms, pay down debt, cap the interest rate on your debt, and squirrel some money away. I think in those three things. So to the extent that you have the ability to get debt paid down, I would think it's a real priority. To the extent that you have floating rate debt, I would see about capping it. I do think interest rates are going to go higher. And then lastly, even if you're doing it just a small amount every month, even if it's just $50 or $100 a month, do be putting some money away. Do be putting some money. I could have phrased that better, but put some money away on a monthly basis, just so you're building a bit of a reserve on the side.
All right, Brendan. Now, for people who might be new to investments, there are a lot of different accounts to consider. So could you walk us through what they are and why they're important?
Wow. Okay. So yes, there are a lot of ways in Canada, particularly, to do that squirreling of money away, and each has its own time and place. So in the old days, before that whole alphabet of different accounts, RSPs, TFSAs, RESPs, there was just an investment account. And this is the simplest and most straightforward way, just putting money in. There's no tax, anything about it in terms of advantage to putting it in or taking it out. And yes, it is taxable while you're there, but if you're just starting out, the tax consequences, generally speaking, are not that big a deal, whether it's dividends or capital gains. Now, most people, though, seem to talk about RSPs around this time of year because there's a weird quirk in Canada that you can contribute money to your registered retirement savings plan, your RRSP, for the previous year up to the first 2 months of the following year. So you can contribute and get a tax deduction on your RSP contribution in 2023 against your 2022 taxes. And this is why people get confused. So people are talking about it now, and I think it's worth making an RSP contribution for people who are looking to either put money aside for retirement or people looking to save for a house, because there are ways that you can use your RSP in what's called a home buyer's plan to actually take money out of that for a house. So RSPs are a way of getting started, as is our straight up investment accounts, but there are others as well, and we can talk about that if we have time.
Some helpful advice there, Brendan. Now, on the topic of RRSP accounts, some people might qualify to change their RRSPs into an RRIF account. So can you tell us a little bit about that and when people should consider making that change?
Okay, now RRIF, I see there's a whole alphabet, Registered Retirement Income Fund. RSPs were originally designed for people in the private sector who weren't part of big corporations or governments to stand instead of a pension. And a RIF, an RRIF, it was a way of paying out that pension as opposed to buying a life insurance annuity or some other product. So when you turn 71, you actually have to turn your retirement savings plan into a vehicle that'll actually start paying you out some of that money. Because you get a tax deduction for putting money into an RSP, the government wants to get that tax back eventually. So the money you take out of a RIF, an RF, the first 2,000, there are ways that can be tax exempt, but everything above that is actually taxable. The theory is that when you're in your earning years, you're making more money and are taxed at a higher rate. And once you're retired, you're taxed at a lower rate because you're not making quite as much money. So the idea is this RIF, this RIF, is a vehicle to allow people to start taking out money. You have to start taking it out at 72, but some might want to do that earlier. It's much the same question like with your Canada pension plan, your CPP, whether you take it early or the regular time or later. It really depends on what your cash flow needs are expected to be both now and in the future.
All right, Brendan, always helpful advice. It looks like we just have about 10 seconds left here, but if you could leave us with one message for investors in 2023, what would it be?
The best thing for the vast majority of people, particularly young people, is to do some sort of regular contribution plan, because if you don't have money, you have something that's even better, and that is time. And if you take advantage of time, the volatility, the ups and downs, all that you hear in the newspapers and on the TV don't mean anything.
Welcome back. Now it's time for our weekly market update with Catherine Murray, host of The Buck Stops Here. Take it away, Catherine.
Thanks, Nima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Well, we are seeing a nice rally to start this week. Yesterday, in particular, on Wednesday, was a risk-on day. We had electric vehicles, technology, REITs, home builders, consumer discretionary, all leading the market higher. Conversely, of course, the more defensive areas of the market were the laggards. So you have pharmaceutical stocks within there, telecom, just as an example, precious metals as well. All eyes, of course, were on this morning's CPI print out of the United States. So an inflation reading, and therefore what the Fed may or may not do. And it came in exactly in line with expectations, down by 0.1. So now the year over year reading is 6.5%. Again, that's down from 7.1% on an annualized basis. So in other words, the bulls are leading the charge here with the belief that the U.S. Federal Reserve, given the fact that inflation is coming down, will in fact cut maybe by about 50 basis points in the back half of 2023. That is the bullish case, but there's still a lot that remains to be seen in terms of how sticky inflation is. So we'll continue to keep our eyes on those readings. Consensus does believe that the Fed will sit on the sidelines and, as I say, actually lower rates or pull back on that tightening. So the bulls are very much in charge of the markets right now. Earnings, of course, in focus. We've got the big U.S. banks kicking off the earnings season, fourth quarter earnings season, starting this Friday. Tomorrow, we'll have J.P. Morgan as well as Wells Fargo and B of A all reporting their most recent results. The themes, of course, will be that we've seen strong net interest margins coming out from the banks, capital markets likely to be on the soft side, fixed income and commodity trading likely higher, investment banking fees likely lower, and equity performance somewhat mixed. So on their equity trading platforms, somewhat mixed, just makes sense. There's been so much volatility, means a lot of money managers have actually, quite frankly, been sitting on the sidelines. So bottom line, I think we can expect that the U.S. bank earnings will be somewhat fine. Keep in mind, of course, that the fourth quarter bar for expectations on the earnings result is really very low. I think what's going to be key and critical for the stock performance will be what we hear from the company managements as it relates to their 2023 outlook. So guidance is going to be very key. But of course, as I say, the bar has been set low. So we'll see if bad news can still equal positive stock performance. That is, of course, if they lower guidance, which we've certainly seen a lot of. In fact, more than 20% of the S&P 500 companies have actually pre-announced. That's actually a very big number. Stepping aside for a moment in terms of looking at some of the stocks and where analysts see opportunities, we've actually seen some upgrades in the home builder sector this week, Lennar, Pulte, as well as Toll Brothers. And we're also, of course, continuing to hear from various strategists as it relates to their outlook for 2023. PIMCO, the bond kings, largest bond money managers out there, they are bullish on bonds for 2023. And Goldman Sachs actually says that, there's probably some downside is constrained for the outlook as well. I'd also just point out, just to be able to keep our eyes a little bit on the Bitcoin area of the market. And accordingly to the Washington Post, FTX has recovered more than $5 billion in assets. Away from that, we're keeping our eyes, of course, on the TSX. We're seeing a little bit of choppy trading today. The energy sector is the outsized gainer. That, of course, follows a 3% rise in WTI yesterday and a 1.3% rise in the price of oil today, so helping the energy sector here on the TSX. And we did see some moves higher yesterday as well in the Canadian markets. No major economic releases here in Canada today, but next week will in fact be quite busy. We'll have a CPI reading and also the fourth quarter business outlook and consumer expectations survey. And of course, following last week's strong Canadian job data, there is expectations that the BOC will raise rates on January the 25th. Lastly, I'll just leave you with the bull case. We've had certainly some very volatile markets. There's still a lot of unknowns as it relates to the U.S. Federal Reserve, but sentiment is really quite low. And expectations, as I said, the consensus, and it could be wrong, are that we will see the U.S. Federal Reserve pull back on their tightening. I would really strongly encourage you to watch my interview with Barry Allen this Sunday. He is an expert in the bond market and a real Wall Street, Bay Street veteran within the fixed income markets and understanding what the Fed will or will not do. That's on the Buck Stop here this Sunday. Nima, I'll leave it there. Back to you.
All right, thanks for that, Catherine. Again, that was Catherine Murray, host of the Buck Stops Here, which airs Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern only on the News Forum Network. All right, stay tuned. We'll have more news from around the world right after the break, so stay with us. We'll be right back after some short messages. The White House says documents with classified markings from President Joe Biden's time as vice president have been found in a storage space in the garage at his home in Wilmington, Delaware. Another document with classified markings was found in an adjacent room, and officials say all of them have been turned over to U.S. Justice Department lawyers. The discovery comes several days after it was disclosed that sensitive documents were also found at the office of Mr. Biden's former Washington Institute. A deadly attack by Russian forces continues on the eastern Ukrainian town of Soledar. Russian forces are using mortars and rockets to bombard the town in an unrelenting assault as they fight for a breakthrough in the east. Ukrainian officials claim more than 100 Russian troops have died over the past 24 hours in the battle for Soledar. All right, well, meanwhile, India's army chief says the border situation with China is stable but unpredictable. The proclamation comes as a nearly 2.5-year standoff continues between tens of thousands of soldiers from both countries in the eastern Ladakh area. General Manoj Pandey told reporters on Thursday that the countries were continuing to talk, both at the diplomatic and military levels, and that India's military maintains a high level of preparedness. India claims China is occupying a large chunk of its territory where the current face-off is happening. A Swedish government-owned iron ore mining company says it has identified significant deposits of rare earth elements in Arctic Sweden. The elements are essential for the manufacture of electric vehicles and wind turbines. LKAB's CEO said the quantity of rare earth metals exceeds 1 million tons, and it is the largest known deposit of its kind in Europe. Sweden's energy and business minister said the EU's self-sufficiency and independence from Russia and China will begin in the mine. A leading human rights group says widespread opposition to Russia's invasion of Ukraine demonstrates the power of a united response against human rights abuses. Human Rights Watch says in its annual World Report, there are also signs that power is shifting as people take to the streets to demonstrate their dissatisfaction in Iran, China, and elsewhere. The report covers human rights conditions in more than 100 countries and territories. Well, it looks like Australia has canceled its appearance at an upcoming cricket series against Afghanistan in protest of that country's treatment of women. Cricket Australia has scrapped a 3-game series in the United Arab Emirates that was set for March. In a statement today, Cricket Australia said the decision comes after the Taliban's recent restrictions on women's and girls' education and employment opportunities, along with their ability to access parks and gyms. Malawi's health minister says the country's worst cholera outbreak in 2 decades has killed 750 people so far. The southern African country of 20 million people first reported the outbreak in March last year. Africa CDC Director Ahmed Agwel Oma said on Thursday 14 African countries are reporting cholera cases, with Malawi at the epicenter. Last year was one of the warmest on record for the planet, with a global average temperature of 14.76 degrees Celsius. U.S. government agencies say that puts 2022 among the 5 or 6 warmest years on record. Government scientists warn that record-shattering hot years are on the horizon for the planet. This is due to relentless climate change from the burning of coal, oil, and gas. The death of a newborn North Atlantic right whale found under a pier in North Carolina last week is quite the blow to the critically endangered species. New England Aquarium senior scientist Philip Hamilton says the male calf was the 11th right whale born this season. There are only about 340 of the whales left on the planet. Oceana Canada is welcoming news that the Federal Fisheries Department is extending its deadline to require that fishers use gear that helps to prevent entanglements with whales. Well, it looks like Canadian singer and songwriting legend Joni Mitchell is set to receive another Lifetime Achievement honor. A year after being celebrated at the Kennedy Center, Miss Mitchell will receive the Library of Congress Gershwin Prize for Popular Song. The 79-year-old is in good company, as previous winners of the Gershwin Prize include Sir Paul McCartney, Stevie Wonder, and Carole King. Some of Mitchell's best-known songs include Big Yellow Taxi, Both Sides Now, and Free Man in Paris. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website and make sure to follow us on our social media handles. We're available on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily News.